Hello, guys and gals, and this is episode or part 17 of our reading of Guinevere by Sharan Newman. As always, we will go over the copyright information. That's always important. This is copyright 1981 by Sharan Newman, who gave me expressed written consent to read this on my YouTube channel. Anyways, in the last episode, or part, Guinevere wanted to go home really bad, and so they finally agreed to let her. Ickfrith, I don't know if I'm saying that right, ran away and apparently swam away. Nobody actually went to look for him or anything. And they didn't seem to notice that he was, or care that he was gone. Anyways, and she's getting ready to go home, as in Guinevere is getting ready to go home. Anyways, Alwissa, what is her name? Sorry, it's been a week since I've read this, so the girl, I don't know. Okay. Oh, Alswitha. Okay. Sorry about that. Now we are all up to date. We're going to pick up where we left off, and we started right here. We ended right here at the bottom of this page. Arthur was interested in meeting Guinevere, which is something that Merlin didn't really want, but, well, Merlin can't really do anything about it. Anyways. Okay. It says here, Guinevere rode through the forest joyfully. The day was beautiful, soft, and moist with growth. 1,000 shades of green crept across the trees, the stones, and the earth. She was still riding pillion behind Belinus, as a proper lady should, but she wished for her own horse and the freedom of riding astride. It could be very uncomfortable to have to twist like that, sitting sideways, but turning forward to hold on to the rider. But today they were traveling slowly, so that she did not need to hold on. Everyone was relaxed. The men sang, or told stories, or speculated on their chances of being accepted to serve in the mysterious new legion Arthur was forming. Gawain led the group. Once this had been a good-sized road, wide enough for at least 3 men to ride abreast, but it had been abandoned to the forest for some years ago, and now young trees burst from between the stones, and moss and tangly vines covered most of the rest of it. Still, the trees were not yet full grown, and the pathway was still visible. It was a good road to take if one was in no hurry, cool and inviting. It was not much trouble to pick a way around broken rocks and saplings. Gawain yawned. It was late afternoon, and time to be looking for a place to camp. He glanced back to see that everyone was keeping up. Guinevere seemed to have drifted into half-sleep herself. He noticed. She leaned against Belinus' back with her eyes closed. He could tell that Belinus was near rigid in his attempt to keep straight and still so as not to jostle her. Gawain chuckled. She would have to ride with somebody else tomorrow. The honor of carrying her was clearly more than Belinus could bear. Every muscle in his body would be sore by morning if he kept that posture long. Suddenly there was a crashing sound in the forest, and before they could realize what was happening, the road on both sides and before them was full of men. They were shouting and waving long knives and axes. The horses reared and tried to plunge through them, but the men held firm, and their axes glinted in the setting sun as they slashed at the horses' legs and necks. "Treachery!" Gawain cried, drawing his sword. "Belinus, get Guinevere away from here." With a wild cry, he drove the sword into the man nearest him. Then he circled around, trying to cut his way to Belinus, who was trapped in the middle. He was glad to see that everyone had kept their head and was still trying to form a tight circle around Guinevere. She was clutching Belinus' waist tightly and sensibly leaning to the left so that his sword arm would be free. But there were only a few of them, and there must have been over 50 Saxons. Where they had all come from? How long had they been waiting? How did they even know the caravan would come this way? Gawain hacked at another man in his path and was frightened to feel how heavy his sword was becoming. He realized with a wave of panic how low the sun was. In desperation, he swung wildly at the glinting knives that were trying to chop his horse from under him. To drag him to the ground. He could tell that he was being cut off from the others, and that they were all being separated. Belinus was making a valiant effort to get through and away, but it was no use. Someone had planned this too well, he thought bitterly, but who could have known? He could feel the energy flowing from him as the sun sank behind the trees. As if in answer to his question, his last sight before he lost consciousness was Egfrith, watching from the side of the road, a satisfied smirk on his face. For a moment, Guinevere was hardly aware of what was happening. Her first thought was that she must keep her seat or risk being trampled. Soon it was clear to her that the other men were being surrounded and pulled from their mounts. She could hear their cries of anger and pain. She saw Cheldric frantically switching his sword to his left hand, his right arm hanging limp and bleeding at his side. They were around her, and she was too frightened and confused to notice what was happening to the others. The attackers were pulling at her despite Belinus's brave attempts to ward them off. He was hampered by the fact that he couldn't use his weapon well without hitting her too. His horse reared and plunged, and Guinevere slipped. She hung from the folds of his cloak and tried to scramble up again, but someone grabbed her leg and another got her about the waist. She screamed and dug her nails into the cloth. Belinus frantically tried to twist himself around and hold her, but another man slashed at the horse's hindquarters, so it reared again. Belinus was caught off balance and thrown off, taking Guinevere with him. Her fingers were still so tightly attached to the cloak that when they pulled her loose, the material ripped and stayed with her bent hands. She screamed hysterically and struck out in blind terror at those holding her. She heard raucous laughter and smelled a nauseating combination of human sweat and rancid animal oil. Then something hit her, and she slumped across her captor's shoulders, unconscious. Her last thought was of her unicorn. Once Egfrith saw that she was taken, he called to the other warriors to come away quickly. But some of them are still alive, one protested. Leave them, Egfrith ordered, especially that one. He pointed at the snoring Gawain. I want them to know how we have beaten them and what we have taken from them. Lame the horses so we cannot be followed. We have no need of them to defeat those dotard peacocks. Hurry, we must be back at our camp by tomorrow at dawn. The men disappeared into the dark woods. Most of those in the company that had ridden out from Cador were dead or severely wounded. The horses went mad in their pain and wandered wildly among trees and sharpened rocks. They stumbled on far from the place where the men lay in their agony. Only Gawain slept peacefully through the night. Chapter 14. Gawain had awakened at the first light of dawn to the screams of the downed horses and the moans of the wounded men. He saw that apart from a cut on his leg, he had not been harmed. He felt sick and self-hatred. Sick with self-hatred. They hadn't even thought him dangerous enough to kill. At this time, he considered a proper Roman soldier would fall on his sword and so assuage his shame. Luckily, Gawain had little Roman blood, and it occurred to him that his death would not help those of his friends who were still alive. Of the 12 men who had been the escort, 4 were slain, 3 more were probably near death, including Cheldric, and the others, excluding himself, were wounded badly enough that they could not be expected to travel far on foot. Gawain cursed himself again as he realized that in the new morning he had strength enough to bury the men that he had been too weak to save the night before. He tended first to the wounded and then started preparing the graves. He had just finished this task when he heard a horse trotting from the forest. A messenger on his way from Lord Cador to Sidra halted and gaped in disbelief at the carnage before him. Stop gawking and race for your life to Leodegrance. Have him send help, horses and litters. Tell them the Saxons have captured his daughter. Go, Gawain shouted. The man never bothered to speak. He simply turned his horse and went back as fast as the road would let him. Gawain placed the men who had lived on a pallet of blankets and clothing under the trees. He did his best to bind the cuts and gashes, but 2 more men bled to death before noon. Cheldric was delirious with fever and the pain of his mangled arm, but he would not submit to death. He was furious at being trapped so ignominiously and shrieked over and over again what he would do to the Saxon swine, until Gawain almost felt grateful when he finally fell unconscious and subsided to an incoherent mumble. Gawain had managed to slow the bleeding, but it seemed impossible to him that the arm could be saved. Knowing Cheldric, he thought it might be better if the man did not survive. Belenius had only hit his head when he fell from his horse and had been knocked out for the night. He had a terrible headache and was having a difficult time focusing, but otherwise he was whole and feeling more guilt than pain. I couldn't protect her, Gawain. I let them trick me. What will they do to her? He repeated, despite Gawain's insincere reassurance that they probably only intended to hold Guinevere for ransom. The other two men, Lothra and Morcant, had deep cuts in their legs from the knives. Although they would be unable to walk for some time, they had received no permanent harm. Gawain tended them as best he could all day, and Belenius was well enough to take over for the night. Early the next day, Leodegrance galloped in, accompanied by half the men from his estate. It was clear that he had not bothered to carefully pick a trail among the rubble. He did not bother with formalities either, but took in the situation at once and set his men to prepare litters and administer medicines. His eyes swept across Gawain, who was so obviously unhurt, and turned from him in contempt. He knelt beside Morcant and asked him gently what had happened. Morcant glanced questioningly at Gawain, who gestured for him to answer. It was that Icfrith, sir, that hostage that escaped. We thought him dead, or we never would have come this way. He knew where we would be. He knew our weaknesses. That sister of his. She made out that she was Lady Guinevere's friend, so shy and frightened. She must have told him everything. He didn't understand 2 words we said. Pigs. The word spat itself upon the ground. Is the Saxon girl still at Cador? Leodegrance wanted to know. Yes, still safe enough there. Oh, she's safe enough there. Then we will deal with her soon, when there is time. The first thing we must do is to get my daughter back. We are taking you all to my villa. None of you is in any condition to fight. You acquitted yourselves well in her defense, but your work is finished. I've sent for Arthur. Without a word to Gawain, he arranged for everyone to be taken with him. Gawain was given a horse and followed the procession, loitering behind, ashamed to stay with them, but too proud to run away. He cursed his unknown father passionately. They traveled all day, keeping a fast pace despite the care needed for the wounded. But Gawain's heart sank when he realized that it would be nearly night again when they arrived. He lashed himself to the horse with his reins, determined not to make a fool of himself by sliding from his beast and being lost in the woods. Gwendolyn met them at the gate, her face drawn and empty. Merlin and Arthur, she told them, were already there, and Cador had been reached and would arrive soon. Arthur had brought a large force if needed to attack the Saxons. The legion was camped in the field behind the villa. She sent the wounded men to rooms made ready for them, but paused when Gawain slid clumsily to the ground before her. Bring that one with you, Leodegrance ordered sharply. There's nothing wrong with him, and he has many questions to answer. With a mighty effort, Gawain managed to stumble across Gwendolyn into the atrium. It was half an hour past sundown. All the strength he could muster was not enough to keep his eyelids from falling, and soon as they had entered the building, he slumped limply to the floor. Leodegrance, I thought you said he was not hurt, Gwendolyn cried in alarm. What is wrong with him, then? I can't rouse him. Merlin hurried over from his place and gazed with pity at the collapsed form. His name is Gawain, he explained. He is one of Morgan's boys, remember? The summer lot was away, and she declared that the child had been fathered by a ray of light that had forced its way into her sleeping chamber. Oh, yes, Gwendolyn nodded. That remained a conversation staple for about 2 years. So this is the child? I'd heard that there was something strange about him. What should we do with him? Have someone carry him to bed. He cannot be awakened until sunrise. We can speak to him then. When Gawain awoke the next morning in a strange soft bed in a clean, dry room, he thought for a moment that he had died in the night and was now in paradise, but upon reflection he realized that heaven was not likely to be his fate, and the sound of voices outside the window reminded him of where he was. His heart sank as he remembered Leodegrance' stern accusations, and knew that he would now have to face him, and Gwynlyn, and explain how he had let their daughter be captured. He lay in bed for a long while, hoping that everyone would forget about him. Then he grew angry at his own cowardice and got up, dressed, and went out in search of his host. He found them all in the dining hall, sitting much as he vaguely remembered from the night before. Leodegrance, Gwynlyn, Cador, Merlin, and oh no, Arthur too. It could not be anyone else. Gawain saw all his dream of glory flutter away. The table before them was set with food, which had obviously been there some time, for pools of grease had congealed up on the plates. The candles were burning low and had already guttered out unnoticed. Gawain entered as unobtrusively as he could, but he came in just as a lull occurred in the conversation and all eyes turned to him. He didn't know what to do. He felt like an intruder and a fool. He didn't know that in the early morning sunlight he looked like a god, valiant and strong. Gwynlyn thought in surprise how much he resembled the portrait of Christ in their chapel, which, as was well known, was simply a portrait of Apollo with a nimbus added. For a moment no one addressed him. Then Gwynlyn gave him a tired smile and beckoned him closer. Merlin has explained your problem to us, Gawain, she comforted him. We know that you could do nothing more than you did for Guinevere. Now we must try to find a way to get her back. Come sit with us. Perhaps you can suggest something that we haven't thought of. Gwynlyn, Cador sounded exasperated. We have chased this around and around like a dog after its tail. We must recover Guinevere before the Saxons get her back into their territory. The only way to do this is with a large army and a sudden attack. The longer we delay, the less hope we have of catching them. And I have said that is madness, Gwynlyn retorted. Her voice was growing hoarse. That is the one sure way we have of getting my daughter killed. The first thing the Saxons will do is slay her. I think we should try to bargain with them, Arthur added. I've had enough I've had enough of killing. Perhaps they are sick of it too. They may only want a simple exchange. Allel's daughter, Alswitha, for your daughter. I would go myself to treat with them. They have already broken their bonds. Oh, they have already broken their bond, Leodegrance broke in. We cannot trust them to return her unharmed in any case. Gawain realized then that they were only reiterating arguments that they had made over and over throughout the night. Each gave an opinion and then waited for a rebuttal, but no one was sure enough for them all to agree. Merlin knew it too and was tired of pointless wrangling. Stop, he commanded in a thunderous roar. We cannot wait for Guinevere to be imprisoned in their land. They are too powerful there, and the conditions for her release would be even harsher. They have already shown how little they care for Alswitha. For her safety was forfeit when they broke the truce. We cannot attack them openly, for they would slay her at once, having nothing to lose. We have considered everything tonight but a Trojan horse, and for all we have argued, the time is quickly fading for us to catch them. If we do nothing, she will certainly be lost to you forever. Now, let's decide on some plan, anything. Merlin was furious, half because he was tired of the arguing, and half because he was irrationally angry with Guinevere for causing him yet another problem. Why couldn't she have stayed at the castle? It seemed that every time that child did anything, she upset the entire country, and Arthur had it in his head to marry her. Merlin knew that it would be a disaster. Darn these forebodings. Why couldn't he either see the future clearly or not at all? He sometimes felt that God was mocking him, reminding him that he was only a man after all, despite what people might believe. He almost wished that Guinevere would be killed. It would be a clear rallying point for amassing an army, and then they might be strong enough to rid the island of Saxons once and for all. Also, it would leave Arthur's mind free to consider a more sensible alliance. If she were anyone's daughter but Gwynlyn's, he might even try to arrange an accidental death to be blamed on the Saxons. However, he sighed and reached for a flask of wine. Gawain only half listened to the discussion. He was still reeling from the relief he felt at being understood and forgiven. Anyways, he didn't think he could come up with anything better than Merlin could. Then his ears picked up on one of the phrases that connected with something he remembered. A Trojan horse? Leodogran stopped what he had been saying and stared at Gawain. Do you know what that was? Gawain nodded. Well, then, I don't suppose you take such an idea seriously. It would take months to build such a thing. It was very useful to the Greeks, but somehow I doubt that even the Saxons would be taken in by a hollow wooden horse. There always seems to be a number of flaws in that story. Anyways, how did the soldiers keep their armor from clanking? Why didn't the Trojans hear them breathing? How many men could really fit inside a wooden horse? How would they get out without being noticed? Perhaps the Greeks knew the answer, but it won't help us now. He dismissed the idea. That's not exactly what I meant, sir, Gawain said eagerly. An idea was growing in his mind, and the words spilled out. What I meant was, must we attack them honorably? Do we have to send warning or follow the usual plan of attack? Leodegrance and Cador looked at him as if he had gone mad. Honor? What has that to do with the situation? Guinevere has been kidnapped in a vicious trap sprung on you quite without warning. The Saxons have broken every binding solemn vow they have been given. We will get her back by any trick we can think of. Only, Gwynlyn added sadly, we can't think of any. Well, Gawain hesitated. He felt rather outclassed by his company. I did have a thought. Alswitha told us many of the stories of her people. Geraldus is helping her translate them. One thread that seemed to be in all of them is a great fear of monsters and ghosts. Monsters? Cador snorted. What child's tale is this? It's true, Gawain insisted. You have seen that. You have seen that they won't live in our abandoned towns. Alswitha says that's because of the ghosts. And one of their kings across the sea apparently won his crown as a result of this defeat of some horrible monster that was ravaging their land. Legends, minstrels' tales. No one really believes them. Leodegrance waved him away. No, Gawain repeated. The man is still alive. Aelel knew him. The Saxons believe that the forests and meres are full of monstrous beasts, and they fear them when they shrink from nothing else. That is very interesting, if true, Merlin said calmly over the derision of the others, but I do not see how that will help us. Gawain looked pleadingly at the group before him and said, I know it seems impossible, but everything else you suggest sounds even more so. Couldn't we create a monster, maybe have it carried within view of their camp on horseback so that it would be seen even larger? Take along kettles and horns and make a noise with Then, when they are engaged in fleeing from the creature, another group, perhaps only a few strong warriors and horsemen, could race in from another direction and rescue Guinevere. The horsemen might even paint their faces like the Picts in the north and wear horns or masks to be more fearful. It could work, couldn't it? He saw that they were considering. Perhaps it sounded too theatrical to work. His shoulders drooped. What hope did Guinevere have? Arthur spoke first slowly, as if still revolving the plan in his head. There are problems. It would have to be done carefully and swiftly, with no mistakes. Still, it appears to present the smallest amount of risk, both to the Lady Guinevere and to the rescuers. I would be willing to leave the group that attacked. The greatest danger would be to those who played the monster. Finding the camp will be the least of the worry. They are making a direct line for their own territory. I think we should try it. But it is your daughter. I will not go without your approval. Leodegrance and Gwynlyn looked at each other. They were silent for a long time. Finally, Gwynlyn laid a trembling hand upon her husband's without looking away from his face and nodded. From her face, he nodded. There is no plan without danger, he said. If you will take the risk for Guinevere's sake, we will give it our blessing. Gawain, will you be one of the rescue party? Arthur asked. Gawain ground his teeth in frustration. I cannot, Lord. I would give anything in the life to do this for Guinevere. It is as dear to me as a sister. For Guinevere is as dear to me as a sister. But this must be done late at night when most of Aelel's men are asleep and easily surprised. I am unable to be of use then, you see. I'm sorry, lad, I forgot, Arthur apologized. "Don't be ashamed. I've had excellent reports of your valor and courage, and when I return, we will try to find a place for you in my cadre, if that would please you." "Oh, yes, my lord," Gawain breathed, almost forgetting Guinevere in his good fortune. It would please me greatly." Guinevere finally woke to find herself lying on a pile of dusty furs. Her head hurt, and her back and stomach were sore. She couldn't imagine what had happened to her. There were Saxon guards all around her, and at a campfire a few yards away there were more men in Saxon dress. Her hands were not bound, and she wondered how they had missed this, until she realized that the guards would surely be able to catch her if she tried to escape. She was hardly a match for them. The night was chilly, and she was still clad in her thin woolen gown. Her braids had become unpinned and hung across her shoulders and almost to her knees in disheveled plaits. She was frightened, but also curious. So these were Alswitha's people. There were resemblances. They all had the pale, almost silver hair, which the men wore in thick braids held in place by gold buckles. They wore short tunics over leggings and boots, and every man she could see was festooned with gold jewelry, armbands, brooches, pins, earrings, belts, all of it intricately shaped and finely wrought. She wondered if all of them were noblemen, or if everyone among the Saxons was so rich. One of her guards noticed that she was awake and called to the men about the fire. One hurried over and stood above her, staring thoughtfully. Guinevere stared back in pride and fear. Ye wine vera, he said. It made no sense to her. She continued her blank gaze. He repeated it, "Ye wine vera," and pointed at her. Suddenly she realized that he was trying to say her name. She lifted her chin in disdain and pronounced it correctly. Now the man looked puzzled. He switched his stare to her braids, and with a strange look reached down and lifted one. Guinevere shrank from him. He laughed, not unkindly, but she was too afraid to tell. "Ich habe an Dochter with swa gold," he murmured. It wasn't true, of course. His daughter was lovely, but her hair was not as rich and living as Guinevere's. Still, in his eyes, Alswitha was beautiful too. However, Guinevere had no idea of what he was saying, and only grew more terrified as he tried to speak to her. Finally, he put down the braid and went back to the campfire. There he seemed to be giving orders about something. Guinevere peered into the dark. Someone was being dragged from the other side of the camp. The person was protesting and struggling all the way. The fire was too bright between her and whomever it was, so she could not tell if it was a man or a woman. She saw the light gleam upon the neckband of a slave and wondered why the poor thing was so determined not to be brought to its master. We're going to pick this up when we leave off. You'll see why in the next episode, because I know what's coming up next. And I'm going to leave this on a cliffhanger because I can. We've been reading from Guinevere by Sharan Newman. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.